Hello. Thank you for coming this afternoon to our fall education event. I want to welcome you who don't know me. My name is Paul Lieba. I'm your 2017 chapter president. I want to start off by thanking the volunteers who put a lot of time into the event, specifically Scott Waters from Waters Marketing. Also, the members of our board would like to acknowledge them for all the time and effort they put in throughout this year and to the event as well. Victoria Mitchell from Spectre & Co. Jessica DeMello from ESP. Sandra Harsar from Bright Ideas. And some other board members who couldn't make it. Scott, of course, we've just mentioned from Waters Marketing. We will be having a nomination for our board for next year, so we are welcoming volunteers for next year. We will be having a meeting next Friday. If you are interested, please come speak to any one of the board members, and we'd love to talk to you about how you can make an impact on the PPPC Ontario Chapter Board. Without further ado, because I know you don't want to hear me talk, I'd like to introduce our guest speakers today. Today we have Terry Vickers-Craig from CYA International and Neil Pitts from Differentiate Consulting. And we invited these folks here because they have 64 years in combined in the promotional product industry, and we'd really like to hear what they have to say about the changing dynamics within our industry. So without further ado, I'd like to get things started, and thank you very much.
All right.
It was nice that Neil started that turning to me saying, do you have 52 of those years? So no, we have the exact same amount, if you can believe that. He said, she said, well, of course, he's the he and I'm the she. And what we're talking about today is radical relationship reform, or what we call R-cubed. The importance of understanding the value and the necessity of creating true and equal partnerships in our association and our industry. This has been a passion of mine forever. It occurred to me very early on in my career that there was an inequity in the way things are done, the way people feel about how things are done, and I've always wanted to kind of look at how we might be able to shake up the infrastructure, or what I call the organizational chart. This would encompass our relationships and how we treat each other and how we behave with each other, how we work with each other, and the whole point, of course, is to create the optimum business development opportunities for all of us. Neil and I have had firsthand experience in all of the promotional chain, so that's supplier, distributor, multi-line rep. Well, he's married to a multi-line rep, I guess that's close. And
Before I started today.
yes, maybe not by the end. So we have this full-rounded experience, and we're going to do it just with that experience because we have a lot to say. And not him, he's very shy, but I have a lot to say a lot of the time. But we decided that we would interview and survey 30 people in the business, top professionals, and get the real deal to what people, an honest assessment of what they think, compared possibly to the perceptions of what's going on. So before we start that though, we want to tell you a little bit about ourselves and why we feel we are the people that could do this justice, hopefully. And we're going to start with Mr. Pitts.
I'm going to start by thanking everybody for coming out. I know it's not the easiest place to get to, and it's a busy time of year. So on that note, thanks again. I think it's important when we talk about bios, and many of you know me well and have heard it, but I think it's relevant because when we talk about things, it really is where I've come from and what I've done that gives it a good reason for being here. So in 1993, we started a little company called Reaction Promotions. There was my ex-partner and one employee, and it grew very, very quickly. And in the span in early 2000, came together with a company called Accolade out of Ottawa, and subsequently we had a tremendous success, incorporated Merits out of Calgary, and we grew the business incredibly, or just amazing. We were approached in 2007 by Golf Town to buy the company. My partner at the time, Mark Roy, who many of us read about this past week, but said, would you sell? And my answer was, I'll sell it, but there's a number. And when you get it, you come and call me. Because I never thought for a minute that it would ever be sold. Well, needless to say, it got sold. And at that stage of the game, I was happy to leave. Was done with the business. I had seen enough. There's a lot of the things we're going to talk about today. I took a hiatus. Some people call it retirement. I can't have any more retirement parties. And took a couple of years and just got, played some golf, traveled. It was really great. And during that period, I kept getting calls from Gary Hurwitz. Many of you know Gary. He owned Ash City. And he continuously called and asked me if I'd come and work at Ash City. And I told him time and time again I had a non-compete and I couldn't work there. And Gary's pretty, he doesn't take no very well. So he said that he would get my release. And he had to get it from a gentleman named Stephen Bevis. Some of you in the room know Stephen, who ran Golf Town. And let's just say Stephen and Gary are rarely told no. So I figured this meeting was probably going to be about a 5 to 10 minute meeting and it would be over. That particular day, and this will make sense as I come around, that particular day, the meeting was scheduled for 1 o'clock. 1:15 came around, 1:30 came around, 2:30, and again, anyone who knows me, I was pacing up and down, wearing out the carpet. So about 3 o'clock, Gary called, and he said, and I said, what? It's been all day. And he says, you think this is about you? And I said, as a matter of fact, I do. Gary said, first 10 minutes was about you. The last 2 hours was about red wine. So he says, I got your release. I said, oh, really? So to this day, I'm uncertain as to how many cases of red wine I was sold for, but I know wine changed hands. He said to me, can you get down here? And I said, well, Gary, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I'm in shorts, and personally, I don't think I've worn pants in several months. So he said, put on some pants and get down here. So I jumped in the car, I drove down Ash City in Orlando, and as I walked in, Gary was there with David Woods, who was CEO and president, and they said, come on, there's people in my office I want you to meet. So I walked upstairs, and as I walked in, it was the craziest thing I'd ever seen. There was about 25 people in the room, and they all had wine glasses in their hand, and I was stunned, and he jumped up on the sofa he had in his office like Tom Cruise on Oprah. And he's standing there, and he's dinging his glass, because Gary wasn't very tall. And he said, I have an announcement. And I said, okay, what's going on? And he said, I want to introduce the new VP of Ash City, US, United States. Well, I had never been offered a position. I had never discussed compensation. I didn't know anybody in the US, so I was not the only person in that room stunned. I ran out and I called my wife quickly and I said, I'm going to be late. I'll explain later. Long story short, went to the US, and this is where the humble aspect of it comes. When I sold the company, we were the biggest. Everybody knew my name. Everybody treated me like I was treated so well. And the irony is that when I went to the US, most of the American distributors, and I was calling on the biggest ones, I went on the road for 46 weeks. And most of the American distributors, they didn't know where Canada was. They certainly didn't know what Accolade Reaction was, and nobody knew who Neil was. So it was really time to learn. And I think that's where it really came down and why I feel privileged to be here tonight, because I got to speak and go to the best companies. If you want to name a major player in the US, I was in 4Imprint, I was in ePromos, I was in, you name it. I have been to some god-awful places. But the reality is, when after that, my time ran out, and I subsequently, my non-compete came up. I was offered a job by Ramo, I don't know where he is, at Impact, there he is. And it was a great opportunity. I had 3 wonderful years with him and his great team, but I realized at that stage, I couldn't give him any more. So I launched Differentiate, and it's exactly what it says it is, differentiate. I'm a firm believer in it. I'm a firm believer in order to be successful, you have to be different in this business. And I look around this room and I see about 7 of my current customers here, and I want to thank them for supporting me. It's been a great ride. But with that resume, I just truly hope that what we talk about today really speaks to the experience, because that's why we were asked to be here. So Tara, your turn.
Okay, not as illustrious, but nevertheless, I started out with a degree in psychology from Concordia, and that hasn't been useful at all in this industry. And from there went to Parker, and that was my inundation, that's the word I'm going to use, into the industry. I was actually thrown into shark-infested waters by my boss, who decided to send me with him to the first PPPC convention in Winnipeg in January. And if that wasn't bad enough, because that was bad, he started to wipe off all the Schaefer imprints off the pens in our Parker booth. So you can imagine my high level of popularity right from the get-go. After that, I went to Pen Pal Pen as their director of sales and marketing, and I did that for a few years until I had my own personal baby boom, 1, 2, 3 in a row. So I was out of commission for a little bit and decided to start my own business, so I had the freedom to raise those kids, partly working from home, and hence began Creative by Craig, which started out as a marketing company. I actually did the Faro medalist program back then, and I think they still use it, and that's 25 something years ago. And that quickly became a multi-line sales agency just because that's what people knew me to be, and I was asked to start representing lines. Toromont Cat's an interesting one that nobody really knows about. When I was doing Creative by Craig, I was asked by AA Advertising out west if I would be their distributor sales rep for Toromont Cat in Ontario, which I was for 10 years, so I was an actual distributor salesperson while I was multi-lining, and it was okay, I think, because they were the only franchisee, so it's not like any of you guys could have gotten the business. Except when another person got the licensee and stole all that business away, and he happens to be sitting right there. So that was the end of my time at Toromont Cat. He had an office a stone's throw from their building, not out west, and then I was done. After I finished repping and I sold my business to Karen Spencer, and that's still running today. We created a lot of things. It's Creative by Craig, including the CME shows, and they're still running. Karen still does them. I became the director of marketing for Debco, which I did for a couple of years, and some of it I did kind of behind the scenes, which was a lot of fun for me. And then I went to Brand Alliance, and that was the biggest change for me, working truly for a distributor, not as a distributor rep, but as their director of supplier partnerships or vendor relations. It was the perfect role for me because I was able to take all the experience that I had and all the thoughts that I have about inequity in the business. I was able to apply it there, and so it was probably one of the most fruitful of the jobs that I had. And had they, not merged with a U.S. company that kind of changed their focus, I would still be there. But I'm not. I'm back at CYA International, a business I started with my sister 7 years ago, and we are a promotional marketing specialist. And we are, I think, what I would call us as troubleshooters. We take all the information that we have from our 30 years experience and talk to distributors and suppliers and find out what it is they want to do. And we talk about how they can do it and how we can help. And so that's what we do now. So that's my experience in the business, and that's 32 years.
Promotional landscape. I wrote this probably 20 times. I think I changed it 3 times today, and it just continuously evolves. And the one thing in the 20 renditions that I was going to speak about today, the one consistent thing was 3 words: respect, personal experience, and technology. It's funny because a lot of people are in this room who know me again well would say Pitsy doesn't know how to use technology nor spell it. But I'm not going to talk about the technology as much as I'm going to talk about the impact that it's had on all of the channels. So when we talk about the channels, I think we all recognize the channels are simple. You have the distributor, you have the supplier, and you have the rep. Whether you're a house rep or a multi-line, it's neither here nor there. We're going to refer to you as rep throughout this exercise. And when I talk specifically about technology, let's start with the distributor. The distributor starts up, and he's firing off, he's shopping price online, he's shopping offshore, and I'm going to hit a lot of things today. And again, keep in mind, we did 30 surveys, and the thing that was really interesting in all of them was almost to a man, the people that filled them out said, I wish I could say that. I can't. Reality is, I can, and I will. So we're not here, I'm not here to be Howard Stern, shock talk. The reality is there's some problems. So we're going to keep referencing the survey, and we'll get to a lot of it as we go through today. But the other thing that we got out of the survey was respect. We noticed that there was a lack of respect consistently between the supplier and the distributor and the multi-line and the distributor. And that's troubling because this industry is very self-reliant. I think of it almost as a teepee. And without all 3 components of it, we have a problem. It's broken. And I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I would strongly suggest that most people in this room, and I've heard comments and complaints, etc., state, and it's broken. So today our goal isn't necessarily to solve everything, fix everything, but as they say with most illnesses or sicknesses, you got to recognize it or problems in order to correct it. We're going to talk openly and candidly today about them. We're going to have a question and answer period, and we're going to encourage people to speak honestly. There shouldn't be repercussions. We would ask that you keep it respectful. We're not looking at trying to start a brawl or a bad thing, but this is our livelihood, and the reality is as simple as that. We need each other. A lot of people that complain about this industry and about the channels, I always say, I didn't choose your career, right? Nobody came out of college and said, I'm going to sell pens. I know you didn't, Kate. And I can say that very few people came into this industry, but I do know is we've all been blessed. There's a lot of people in this industry, within this room, that have had great success. So that's sort of the overview from where we're going to speak of today. We hope you find it interesting, but as I said, this is not, I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not fighting for distributors. I'm not fighting for suppliers. I'm not fighting for multi-lines. I'm fighting for honesty and respect. And I think it's important because we need that in order to move on.
And that leads into my part of the equation, which is tipping the totem. And I think what Neil's talking about is all of these different facets. And what we found in the survey is that people's perceptions are different than the realities, or vice versa, depending on what stage you're looking at. So we have a lot of people who think things are running a certain way, or think people think a certain way, and they don't. And we found in our survey that there was a lot of truth in those surveys, because they knew they were anonymous surveys. They knew that we were only going to share information and not who it was coming from. Sadly, both of us are, kind of saddened by the fact that it has to be that way, because I would love it if everybody could say whatever was on their mind. And maybe afterwards in our Q&A we'll be able to do that a little more. But nonetheless, we still have 30 people's worth of information that kind of corroborates a lot of what we're talking about here. So my view on the totem pole is that right now, and again, this is my opinion and it's backed by a lot of people, but you may not agree with me. Right now, the distributors at the top, the suppliers in the middle, and the multi-line reps at the bottom. Now, remember, we're not on anybody's sides because we've been those people. I have been all three of those people. So I feel very strongly that this is the way it appears to be and the way that we react with one another based on that. But what I'm saying is if we come together here as a group and we talk about some of these problems and some of these misperceptions and some of these problems with respect, and because respect was the one thing, or the lack thereof, was the one thing that showed up on virtually every single one of the 30 surveys. I mean, that tells you something. That's a lot. That's a lot of disrespect, people feeling disrespected. So if we can take this thing and tip it over, what happens? We are three equal partners. There's nobody at the top or the bottom. And this is where we're going to throw everything into question. So I would say, for example, if you asked me, I'll ask you guys, on a supplier rep or a distributor rep, a supplier rep or a factory rep or a multi-line rep, who is their client? Is it the distributor or is it the supplier? How many think it's the distributor? Nobody in this room thinks the distributor's the client? Wow, good for you. How many think the supplier's their client? All right, so it's a lot of you just didn't answer, and that's fine, because I believe it's the supplier, but I was a multi-line rep, and when I was a multi-line rep, the supplier was my client, because he's going to talk in a second, because he doesn't agree with me, in case you couldn't tell. No. But the supplier was the one who paid me, number one. Number two, they're the ones who gave me all the tools to go and do what I was going to be able to do. And they were the ones who were going to supply the product to the people who I was trying to sell stuff to. So to me, they were my client. Now, did that mean that I didn't treat my distributors well? I don't think there's a person in this room who had me as a rep who would say that I did. It's not that I didn't care about the distributors. It's not that I didn't call on those people and work day and night, really, for those people, that group, the distributor. But in my mind, the client was the supplier.
Well, I don't agree at all. She said the supplier pays me. The supplier pays you on commission on what the distributor bought. So I have a problem with that. So we can start with that. I mean, the reality is that you're given tools and you're a conduit to the distributor. So it really is a misconception in my perspective, and I'm not suggesting that the totem pole shouldn't be flat, but what I am suggesting is that the distributor ultimately is carrying the weight as it relates. And I'm not suggesting for a minute they should abuse it, but I am suggesting that they're carrying the weight and making the decision, or making the decision of what product you promote. That's where the whole thing is really, you could argue it all day.
Well, and if that's where the power lies, that's the truth. But my perception is now, after 32 years and being in all those jobs and feeling that way and actually changing it up a little bit, I think we're both wrong. I do. I think the actual only client in this picture is the end user. They are the ones who are buying the product. They're the ones we do everything for. And therefore, this totem pole on its side, if we're all working toward the same client, which is the end user, and we really are, then we have to be equal partners going into that. We cannot keep each thinking we're each other's client all the time because we have a client, and that's the end person. So all of us work all day long to get the perfect product in perfect condition at the right time to that buyer. So therefore, my new perception in 2017 is the end user is the only client, and we, as the three levels of this totem pole, need to start working in a true partnership at an equal level. Neil?
I don't know if anybody's idea has changed. If the survey was taken again today, if anybody would be different based on the two perspectives. There is no doubt in my mind that the distributor has choices to make, and that's why the reps have jobs and they provide a vehicle. And this is where the value of the rep has to be taken into consideration. That's why reps have jobs, because they can get into places that the suppliers can't.
And I would battle that, but there's not time. Go ahead.
Okay.
Supplier and distributor. We're going to talk about each of the groups.
The supplier and the distributor. One of the things that we consistently got in our survey, and I'm going to tell a couple of hopefully funny stories. One of the things that distributors complained the most about suppliers was all the sample kits are the same, all the catalogs are the same, everything's the same. They go, I'll use Jane Street. You go up and down Jane Street, everybody's got the same. So I'd like to tell a couple of stories. Many years ago, a dear friend, many of you know Terry Slattery, and Terry came into Accolade Reaction at the time, and he brought in this big Ash City sales kit, and he had the rack, and he had a steamer, and Terry was going great guns, and I loved him for it. And I looked at him, and I said, Terry, who are my two biggest customers? He said, BMO and RBC. I said, there's 3 blue samples, this entire kit. And his answer was, that's how we do kits. And I said, okay, that's not so good for me. If the Trimark guy comes in and he's got blue shirts in his kit, you're gonna get beat up. So Terry quickly, because he was a pro, ran out, subbed out a lot of the samples out of the kit, from red and green to blue and what have you. And we had a terrific year, and we loved it. It was awesome. So that's just about the sample kitting process. And the second story I always enjoy telling is, I was in San Antonio, Texas, and it was August. It was about 120 degrees. I got out of the car, my glasses fogged up. It was so hot. Walked in this big office. Things were really laid back. And this beautiful golden retriever came running up to me. And I thought, this is great. And I looked to my right, and there he had this beautiful big dog bed. And as I looked at the dog bed, his blanket was a $300 3-in-1 coat we'd sent him as a sample. And the supplier, and I said to the guy, I said, that's my jacket. And he said to me, do you not own a Globe? And I said, pardon? He said, we're next to Mexico. I said, yeah. He said, who the hell sends 3-in-1 jackets to San Antonio, Texas? So upon my return, and I got back and I sat down with Gary, and Bill will attest to this, and I told him, and of course Gary was going to fire half the staff. Everybody was going to get fired that day. And he said, why do we do it that way? And the answer was, well, you know, logistically it makes sense. And my answer to him was, Gary, it's easy, it just doesn't pay well. So Ash City at the time redid all their sample kits. They did it by region, they did it by customer base, they did it, and the reps were told so many A kits, so many B, and the numbers just took off through the roof. And sort of the analogy I always use with people when I talk about this is, if you go to your doctor and you say, I need a prescription, and he writes you a script, and you leave, you got a bad doctor, because what didn't he do? He didn't ask you what's wrong with you. So I think that that's one of the biggest problems that suppliers have across the board, is that they think that this blanket bomb attack to distributors works, and I don't believe it does. It's not personal. Everybody's needs, I look around the room, and I know many of your businesses, and they all operate in a different manner at some stage of the game. And it's not easy to do, but it does result in better things. So from a supplier's perspective, they often fault the reps, and they don't get the results they want. But this status quo, same old, was in every survey we got back from distributor. They said, don't give me what everybody else has got because this is just not working for us.
Well, and that's the interesting part of that is, and I am in full agreement with that. The problem I have, the problem I have though, is that, and I called on Neil for years for Bank of Montreal and RBC, and I knew everything was blue, and because I understood that. And as he said, I mean, everybody knew you had those accounts. But if you read our survey information, I'm going to tell you that a whole bunch of reps and a whole bunch of suppliers say the distributor won't tell you the information. They don't give you the client information. They don't tell you what they're actually going to do with it or who they're going to see. So how could you possibly plan a kit appropriately? And this, again, is part of this honesty that Neil was talking about, that we need to start being open with each other and build trust. And if there's no trust, there's a problem. There is a problem.
If you have people in your office that you don't trust, you have the wrong people in your office.
Right. I mean,
it gets pretty simple. If somebody's looking down and taking confidential information and distributing it, I wouldn't have a job. Most people in this industry wouldn't have a job. It's just, it can't go down that way.
You can't. And so I think, we need to build a relationship where we ask the right questions and we answer those questions. And, we kind of get past where we've come from. I mean, my God, guys, we still have trade shows where we wear secret name badges, right? I mean, the end users are not allowed to tell us who they are and what they do. And that's the level of paranoia that does. So you have to remember, when you're standing in a trade show booth as a supplier, or a rep, and a client comes to the booth and hey, Brad, how are you, Brad? What do you do, Brad? That's all you have is Brad. And instead, you don't know anything about his business, so what are you going to show him? How would a supplier or a supplier rep help you build your business with your client when you bring them to an end user show and we don't get to know what they do? And God forbid they gave us a business card, we'd probably be fired. So if you look at all that and say, okay, wait a minute, what's going on here? The distributor wants individuality in their kits and in their attention. The reps and the suppliers want people to be more open. So how come we don't all think that we're all on the same page? There's a disconnect, and part of what we're talking about here is what is that disconnect and how are we going to fix it? Sorry, the next one is supplier and distributor. No, is that what I just was on? Yeah, supplier and distributor. No.
I need technical help.
Sorry, I do. Supplier and sales rep.
Supplier and sales rep, I love this one. I'm going to ask a question, and I'm probably going to upset people. How many people know what I call the monkey tour? Anybody got a clue what I'm talking about? So let me give it to you. So there's the monkey tour. So a multi-line rep, we'll call her Betty, gets a call from her guy that's in Edmonton and says, I want to come in on Wednesday, and I want you to hook me up with 3 of your top distributors. Well, Betty calls 3 regular people. We all get the call. And in my day, they'd knock on my door, they'd go to Genumark, they'd go to Staples or Cotton Candy, and they'd do the 3. And we say wonderful things about Betty and how she was the greatest person in the entire world. Let me tell you the value that came out of that. None. Absolutely 0. It used to drive me crazy. I got involved because I liked my reps, but at the end of the day, it was a fraud. And if you're a sales manager in this room and you think that monkey tour really works, you're foolish. I could care less. And I can speak to that firsthand because when I was at Ash City, and I apologize for referencing it, but on this side it's relevant. I had 34, 35 reps in the United States. I had an open calendar. I never called a rep and said, I'm coming to your territory. The reality was my calendar was open to any of you. If I could help you, bring me in. There were those that brought me in on a regular basis. Those who brought me in. I had a guy in Louisiana, and he said to me, he said, Neil, down in the South, good old boys don't want to see pretty boys like you. I thought, they don't want to talk to me. The South, it just wasn't for me, and I got that. But there was places where I could make a difference. So if you're a sales manager or VP of sales and you've got a sales team and you think that going out and jumping and driving around Southwest Ontario is a great idea, unless you're bringing something to the table of value, save everybody's time. I really would appreciate it.
And then on the other side of that coin, and again, with change, what if a sales manager, a VP of sales, an owner, whomever it is that's going on the monkey tour, I'd never heard that before, but I'm going to throw it in there, came totally prepared. Came totally prepared with sales reports and sales by product reports, which I think is one of the most underused reports in the entire industry. And went with the purpose of asking appropriate questions and listening, as opposed to sitting in on a sales call. I think a lot of times, and when I was a rep too, my VPs wanted to come out and just go on calls with me. Well, as a multi-line rep, that's brutal because you have other lines, number one. And number two, what's the value of a person being there to just do a call with you? You already know how to do that. So if that was switched up and that call, because the survey said that distributors want to see a VIP from a supplier. They actually want to see them, but they want it to be a valuable, value for time proposition. They want to be heard. They want to be understood. And when this is what we're talking about, that all these people who say the supplier, the multi-line rep, don't understand my business. Well, there's an opportunity to truly understand the business and speak at a higher level. There are some companies who do that and do it that way now, and actually that's relatively new from my perspective on the distributor side, but there's still a whole lot who don't. So that's a very important aspect of this. I think the other problem with sales rep, multi-line reps and sales reps, and some of you guys will not like this, but what happened to me when I first got in the business, I was a multi-line rep, and I think it was my first or second year, and I went to Dallas. And I was sitting with a bunch of people from Corporate Express having dinner, and I guess the table behind us, there was a bunch of women at the table and a bunch of men behind the table, and
happens.
And we were all a lot younger. And we started chatting back and forth. And so the guy behind me said, I'm a multi-line rep, or I'm a sales, whatever he said. And I turned to him and I said, oh, what lines do you represent? And the guy shut down, and turned on me and turned back to the table, and I remember turning to the person going, what the heck was that? Anyway, so I just said, okay. So I went to the bathroom a little while later, and this is the honest to God truth. The guy literally accosted me in the hallway on the way to the ladies' room. He grabbed me by the arm and said, are you out of your mind? And I said, what? And he said, how could you possibly ask me who I represent in front of my supplier? And I said, I don't understand. What do you mean? And what turns out in the US, they will rep 12 or 15 lines and only tell some of the suppliers about some of them. Right, so I'm just like, and I had 6 lines and everybody knows what they were, and it was such a shock to me, but that perception, you can imagine the perception that was building in the US for multi-line reps. So these are things that happen kind of behind the scenes and that affect people's perceptions of each other. And I'm gonna throw this out there now because, I've done all the jobs, as I say, in my life, and there is no harder working person, I don't think, than a multi-line rep who's doing their job. It is a day and night, 24-hour-a-day job. They do all of their work at night when their kids have gone to bed. I'm an example of that. So, but trust me, the perception is not that. The perception, both distributors and suppliers from our surveys have said, not sure what they do, not sure what the value is. And the only thing that's wrong with that story is that we're not communicating the value. None of us, but that's none of us, are communicating our value to one another in a way that everybody understands and absorbs.
And I think that the value that the reps have the ability to provide to suppliers is underutilized. When we were, again, Ash City, we had something called the MARC Council, and that stood for Marketing Advisory Rep Council. It was the top 3 reps from the US, it was top 3 reps from Canada. We'd bring them together on a regular basis, and it was just absolutely incredible. The feedback we'd get in, we'd sit in them, and Bill's here so he could speak to it, but the Americans would say, I want a $5 polo, and the Canadians would say, I want a $25 polo. And it was the ability to listen, and that knowledge is very helpful. If you're a supplier and you have reps and you're not listening to them, that's your conduit. That gets you from A to B. Use your reps for more than selling. They can provide you with information that is so important, thank you, but is so important in product selection, categories to get into, categories not to get into. So I would also suggest that when doing that, it also recognizes the reps themselves, because there's not enough recognition for the reps as far as I'm concerned from a supplier chain.
And I just want to wrap up that section with the need to speak regularly and freely between a rep and their supplier is an extremely important one that is underdone There are still suppliers who don't hold sales meetings. There are still people who don't connect regularly and find out the true value of the rep. And as Neil said, they know it all, those guys. They're out there, they see it and hear it every day. And I know that there are many people, Terry Slattery who tells that story about getting beaten down at a sales meeting for telling the truth. And this has got to stop. I mean, we just got to be able to tell each other how it is and work together to make the improvements. Everybody's in this for the same thing. It's to grow our businesses. Everybody is trying to grow their businesses. And if we acknowledge that up front, it's going to make a big difference on how we relate to each other.
So the next one is one that I'm really passionate, and I've changed the names in this story to protect the innocent. He or she may or may, we're gonna call him Bob, and he's not in the room today. But when I was running Accolade Reaction, one of the rules with reps specifically is that if you were multi-line and you wanted to come in, again, when I say multi-line, I don't want to exclude anybody, a rep. The rule of thumb was you would send in a request, I would look at it, I would send it out to the sales team, and if I didn't get 50% of the sales reps that wanted to see you, I would call you back and say, I'm sorry, because your time, and apparently there's no synergy or reason to have it. This particular case, this was a multi-line. He had some of the top lines in the industry, and he got 0% of people that wanted to see him. So he was a friend, I golfed with him, I all kinds of trips with him and everything else, and I called Bob, and I said, we have a problem. Nobody wants to see you. And he said, that's not good. I'm gonna get fired. And I said, but this isn't my fault. I didn't do this. The reality is that you have given lousy presentations for a very long time. Flipping catalogs, handing samples. It's just not good. He said, please, one more chance. So 2 weeks went by, and he came back in, and this guy was on fire. He had knowledge of what we were working on. He talked to the reps in advance. He had pre-production samples. He had some creative ideas. He talked about capabilities. It was just a wonderful presentation. I walked him out, and I was like, wow, what happened? And this story I call Survivor. And he said, well, I knew if I didn't knock it out of the park today, I was going to get voted off the island. And I said, you're absolutely right. And I think that is one of the biggest problems that we have collectively, and that's distributors, multi-lines, etc. We take a lot of stuff for granted. And we go in and we do the same presentation, and I would just ask of you, before you go into your next presentation, just think about it. If you had one shot and only one shot, would the presentation look the same? And I would think in most cases it's not, because we get complacent and we get to the point where it's my buddy, the sample didn't show up, I'm gonna show up with flip-flops and shorts. It's not a good look, man. If you look like you brushed your hair with a pork chop, this is not good. So we have to have a more professional look. We have to take every opportunity. It is a very, very competitive environment. And every single person, and I mean, you don't have to go. There's a pen supplier here, there's a pen supplier here, there's a mug supplier. It's very competitive. But this idea that you can go in and just wing it, I'm sorry. I wouldn't recommend it. It may be easier, it just does not very beneficial. So, you know, when we talk about that, people always say, why does somebody pick one pen or one hat or whatever over the other? And I guess that's $1 million question. And that's why we have sales reps. So we got to break down barriers. People need to make it the experience. And I talked about it in my opening about the experience being more than buying a product. When we say that, I would tell a story. I got called in by a rep, and I was in Ohio. And he said, I've been going to this big distributor, $40, $50 million distributor. I've been doing lunch and learns. I've been throwing everything at him. I've done everything sampled. I can't get anywhere. So I went down to Ohio, and I walked into this meeting, and I walked into this it was a new building, and his name was Fred, and I said, Fred, you know, this is unbelievable, this building, what's the square footage? And he started to tell me about the square footage, and I said, do you have a call center? And he said, yeah, I have a call center, and he told me how it worked, and he monitors his calls, and blah, blah, blah. We went through the entire, would you like a tour? I asked him about his warehouse, he toured everything. I walked through, and all I saw was all my competitors' brands on the shelf with not one Ash City box. And I said, okay, we've got this far. Why aren't you buying from us? And he said, I don't know. I said, but you've shared with me all your programs, and I got solutions for all of them. Well, that account went from 0 to whatever, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the reality is that when I got back in the truck and with the particular rep, and he gave me the WTF, and I was like, he said, you got more in 30 minutes than I got in 3 years. I said, I asked him to talk about his favorite thing. He said, what's that? I said, himself. Right? You let a distributor go. And I say this, and I qualified this morning, and I see Raymo in the back room, this is not to poke at anybody, but again, I think it's so relevant to the topic. When I was at Impact, and Raymo's very passionate about the company, and above my office door, there was 12 words, and it was his mission statement. And I would challenge how many multi-lines in the GTA could tell me what it said. It's 9 feet long. How many people know what it says? And I'm not picking on anybody. And the point is, you want to get to Raymo? Tell him what his mission statement is. Come on. He's not the bear he looks like. Sorry, Raymo. But I use that as an example. And I go into distributors' offices every day, and there's something, and I see the guys from SCORE, I see the guys from EdgeCom, there's guys from all over the place, and everybody's office is a little different, but it speaks to the passion of who you are. If you want to really earn their business, you're going to learn about what drives the person. Then that mug, it doesn't matter whose mug it is. It didn't matter whose part, what shirt it was. It was about having a relationship and getting to me. So, the last thing I'll say to that was somehow we managed to sell millions of dollars at Ash City in the US. And Gary used to laugh and he'd say, how many part numbers do you know? I'd say, 1. And he said, how could you be so stupid? And the answer was, nobody cares which red shirt it was. It was, how can I solve your problems? And we go back to that doctor story and asking the questions, because at the end of the day, they're going to find a solution that makes them good at what they do and is easy. So think about that when you go into your next calls. There's always something on a wall. There's a guest book. There's the meeting. If you're a distributor, the annual meeting notes are on the desk. Read, find, look, take an interest, because that's who people want to deal with.
And I'd like to just kind of wrap up this section with some thoughts about things that we do or say amongst each other that may not be the best when it comes to trying to build the relationships. And for me, when I gave up multi-line repping, which is, I think it's 7 years ago now, maybe 8, one of the reasons I did was because when I'd started so many years before and I went on these calls, I was such a welcome visitor. I mean, it was just, people welcomed me with open arms, and they considered me a teacher, and they couldn't wait for me to get in and talk about what I had and what was new. And I mean, it was just a very exciting time, and I felt very much valued and very much a partner. By the time I left, I was starting to feel like a courier and a showroom cleaner. And that's the honest to God truth. I mean, people would call me and say, can you drive an hour and a half and take, move your samples around in my showroom? And I think, when did that happen? When did my value to a distributor become that and not an idea generator, a business development partner, all the things that I had worked so hard to be? Somehow that was changing in the mix, and that's kind of where I'm going with that totem pole flipping. And then there's, when I called on a very large distributor years back, and they had a VIP program, which could be the bane of everybody's existence depending on what it's all about. But they actually graded it, and this is just an interesting story about perception and inequality. They rated the supplier on all these different categories, and so we got to sampling, and this was a supplier that I was repping at the time, and she said, you have 3 out of 5, and I said, 3 out of 5 on sampling? And she said, yep. And I said, well, we give you 100% of your samples free, 100% of the time, with free shipping. How could I possibly have a 3? And she said, well, that's what the people thought. That's what they said. And I said, are you going to leave it there? Am I going to stay with a 3 when I'm free, and more free? And it was like, that was the answer. That was our test, that was our survey, and that's the result you got. It was like, okay. So, fairness, being equitable, particularly in resolutions. What is that? You're richer than you think. Well, suppliers are not as rich as you think. So I think everybody's got to start to look at that when they look at the supplier being the one that can always afford to fix the problems, because that's not necessarily the case.
And the only last thing I think that's really important to point out, and the value of multi-lines, and I know it's not in the job descriptions, For the distributors in this room who haven't figured this out yet, the HR in this industry is run by multi-lines. If somebody's going to make a move, they're going to call a multi-line. They're not going to call you directly. They're going to reach out to the people they trust, and they're going to ask. So for the same people that you have, for whatever reason, chosen to disrespect, please don't ask me again why I can't get good people, because it comes back in spades. It is not something that they take lightly, and I know reps get asked all the time. Every call, and if anybody disputes it, please raise your hand. First question asked more often than not is, you know where I can get any good people? Every day. So that's your conduit, guys. Use it. Don't abuse it.
The next slide is respect, and it is the most important one of the ones that we talked about, because a lot of people had a lot to say about that in the survey. I'm going to start off with one that's kind of near and dear to my heart, which is the lunch and learn. I don't know, and I know there's some of you who don't agree with me, so I'm just going to say that, but again, I was on all sides, and I have banished the lunch and learn as a multi-line, as a supplier, and as a distributor. So right across the board, I was even on it. But I consider it the promotional industry's pay-to-play, and I found it disrespectful and offensive as a rep to say that the only way I could get in was if I brought food. And you need to understand, it's not just the food. It's the fact that for a multi-line particularly, and not to say that the reps, but I think the reps companies pay for it, not to say that they should, but it's a little different. Multi-lines pay that out of their pocket. So if you've got 20 people coming to your lunch and learn, and you've got to pay for that food, you're looking at $300-400 in some cases, plus they tell you they have a vegan and they have a vegetarian, so you got to go to different places for that. You carry all this stuff up. This is honest to God, I've done it. You carry all this stuff up with your stuff, and you lay it all over the table. It takes all the space on the table. And now you've got people with greasy pizza hands, or vegan food, whatever it is, on your clothing, on your stuff, and they're munching their papers. And the one step worse than that, and I think you're going to want to point that out, so that to me is a worst case scenario, is that they're in there not paying attention to the presentation because they're eating.
This whole lunch and learn thing, I don't get it. In addition to that, and we did talk about a lot of what we're going to say today could be deemed about respect. My favorite move is the person that comes in, gets their food, and says, I don't have time for your presentation, and leaves. That's about as ignorant as it gets. It's disgusting. I've packed up my things and left, having watched this. If you've ever done it, shame on you. If you can't make it, don't go and eat the food. And then the other thing I would suggest, if you are an owner of a company, this was a big one. If you're going to have somebody bring in $300 or $400 worth of food, you owe it to those reps to have your best people at the table. If you can't, play survivor with them. Say, you know what, nobody wants to see you. Nobody wants to eat your food. Nobody wants to see you. So I think that's a real problem, and it happens. And my wife had 2 this week. I wasn't going to involve her. And I said last night, and I heard the number, I'm like, how much money did you make this week? And the answer was not enough, right? So the reality is that this is rampant. It goes on all the time, and everybody does it. And I'm not suggesting you can't do it, but if you're going to do it, be fair with it. Have your best people at the table, and if nobody wants to come other than to eat, don't have the supplier in. They'd rather not.
And my perspective is, if you're going to have a lunch and learn for 20 people, why don't you buy the lunch and feed the rep who's traveled all the way to come and see you and do your people? Or
now I think you're dreaming.
I know. Or brown bag it, right? I mean, this is the newest pay to play. It's been going on for a while, but it's much more rampant. I've talked to a lot of reps over the last 6 months, and man, a lot of people are bringing this into the mix. So pretty tough for people to have to pay it. You have to sell a whole lot of pens to make $400 back from that lunch. So just so you understand how their commission works, they're the least of the sale, if you remember. From the supplier respect, so rep to supplier, we say that a lot of the reps feel that they're blamed when there's a sales slump, and I think that's true, and may not be credited as well when there isn't one. But I think the biggest point of that, just to make it quick, is that suppliers do need, when the sales are down, to acknowledge their part in that, whether it's their website isn't very good or their competition is doing something different. It's not the rep's fault the minute the sales are down, and the rep may have some responsibility in it for a lot of reasons, but that needs to be discussed and not an automatic assumption. And I think that the reps are looking for that respect. Respect for distributors. So this is when they call with questions. So there's the distributors who want to call a rep or their supplier, they don't want to be referred to a website or a catalog. I think I've heard this a lot of times. You call with a question and they say, well, that's on our website or that's on catalog page 12. Well, you don't really need somebody to tell you that. You just want your answer on the phone. So, if you can say that. And, guys, the one thing I've learned through all of this is it's not what you say or do, it's how you say and do it. And that's what seems to be missing in bringing this high level of disrespect perceived wise. It's people are saying and doing things in a way that you wouldn't do with other people and we shouldn't be doing with each other. So if you want somebody to learn to go to the catalog, you can maybe explain that, but give them their answer first. That's what they called for. And nobody needs to be admonished, although it must sound like we're doing that here, but we're not. We're telling the story as we've been told that story, and we wanted to share that with you. Show up on time and do not go over. This is a rep. They want you to show up on time and don't go overtime in PKs. But the reverse is said. A lot of reps go to a PK session and nobody's there or nobody's ready or they're not going to have it that day. So it happens on both sides. And this is one of the bigger ones, is be an advocate. That's what distributors want. They want the reps to be an advocate for them. They don't want them to slough off problems to a head office, and I think there's a mix of people who do that and people who don't. And then the last one is the respect for suppliers. And fair and equitable problem resolution is really what we want everybody to know. Accountability, Neil, I'm going to let Neil start because he's got a great story about this and about how we all need to understand in our business what a single transaction can do.
It's one of those things, and we all sell product every day, and sometimes we don't have a clue where it goes or what it's for. And so this story takes place in Detroit, and I flew into Detroit, and I met with when I was with Ash City, and I met with this rep, and he said, we're going to meet our client at P.F. Chang's. Okay. So we walked into this restaurant, and there's the two women were sitting there, and this woman was she was in tears, and she was upset. She sat next to me, and she had chopsticks in her hand, and she was like, I am so mad at you, and I mean, thank God I wasn't in a steakhouse, but she went crazy, and I said, I'm sorry, what have we done? And she said, I had an order that cost me $1 million account, and you guys don't care. I said, sure we care, but she said, Neil, it was 11 shirts. It didn't get out. So everybody's like, yeah, it happens. CEO's grandmother's birthday. She lost $1 million account. She told me her kid wasn't going to go to college. She said the car she was driving this trip, she wouldn't be driving next trip. And the reality of it, and I stopped, and I was stunned, and I was like, I was as guilty as anybody of not thinking about it that way. And people buy products because there's a reason. We changed her life that day. And I was so upset when I got on the plane that night coming home, and I was like, how do we make it right? And we never did. But the one thing that we did do, and Chris Turner, he was supposed to, anyway, he got tied up. Chris and I went back, and we went to Ash City, and we sat down, and we called in the entire customer service team. And I told them that story. And I asked them to think about how many times they said, sorry, I didn't get out. So if you're a supplier, you got to get that out. This isn't if and buts. You impacted something, and this is a real story. This woman lost 80, 90% of her business. It happens. We're not playing for fun here. This is serious. And I mean, you know what? She's still in the business, and I still see her every now and again, and she's rebuilding. But that was 5 years ago. She probably went from making $250,000 to 40 overnight over that small shirt order. Wow. So it goes across the board. And I've talked to many distributors who have jumped in cars and, driven across borders and done all kinds of things, and that's because we have to. But don't ever just think about it's only 6 pens or 12 shirts. It matters to somebody. It's a big one, and that is a story that's very dear to me.
It's a big one. And every customer service person in the business should hear it, because it is hard for a customer service person who goes in every day from 9 to 5, making whatever they make, to understand the impact of not answering that call or not moving that piece of paper to the right place to get that order out. And I don't think they do, and I don't think it's their fault. I think they just don't understand the roles we all play, and I think that's a big part of what we wanted to talk about today, was making everybody at all the levels understand the importance of everybody's role in that chain to get to that client who's the end client.
And if you're a supplier in this room, I would really encourage you to take that story and tell it to your customer service people, because it's really hard to even imagine your life changing that much over something that simple.
Yep. So, I mean, here's just a couple, and they're going to go through these quickly. There's some, they're qualities of accountable people that a lot of people in our industry in these surveys are saying they're not receiving, which, again, you kind of shake your head a little bit. Answering emails and requests in a timely manner. I would think it's all happening, but apparently it's not. Doing what you promise. There's another one that came up a lot. It's one of the biggest ones. Take responsibility for actions. And I have to tell you, that's on all three levels that the complaints come from, that they don't feel that other people are accountable for what the problem is. Proactive problem solution, it's one of the most, I think actually for a lot of people, it's how they choose a supplier. As you say, which water bottle you're going to buy, the one who's going to give you the best problem resolve without asking you a million questions and asking you to send it all back first and let me see 3 samples and now we're going to go pick it up at their warehouse and now we've missed an event. So there's an understanding of the timeliness of it that sometimes gets missed, and that's got to be addressed right on spot. Don't blame or make excuses, and show humility and apologize. Shouldn't say this out loud, but I'd like to say that to Donald Trump, just saying. Anyway. The next one.
We don't have that much time.
We don't have that much time. Loyalty is a two-way street. So here's the big one for me. Can anyone in this room explain to me how it is different between selling direct and buying direct? I to this day don't get it. So distributors say they have no problem buying direct, but if a supplier sells direct, they're pretty much tarred and feathered. Does anybody have an answer for that? Honestly. Because I can't find an answer when people say to me, how come one's okay and one isn't? Anybody? Interesting, because that's what we get talked about a lot. Yep.
I have an answer, but I don't know if it's correct.
You know what? There
There's
is
no
no
correct.
wrong one.
It's just a thought that I've had in the past.
Yep.
So when I say this, don't slam.
Louder, Joe, please.
When I say this, don't slam me for saying it, but it's just a thought that I have.
Yeah.
Thought is, all our vendors, I'm a distributor, all our vendors, we've trusted them with the names of all our customers, their addresses, their phone numbers, their email addresses in some cases.
Yep.
They have all the information. So they can certainly go direct to those people. So there's, as we talk about trust, there's that trust that we have to have with our vendors.
But there would be a difference, though, between selling direct and soliciting direct. And that would have to be, I think you'd have to really think that through, right? So yes, if somebody has your information, they go solicit an account, that's a little different, right? So yes, and they do have that information, you're right. So that was different. But realistically, from a perception of loyalty, if you're buying direct from the Orient, you're not, this is like, you give the suppliers the medium and small orders and you go overseas for the big orders. Well, everybody's waiting for the big order, so that doesn't work well, right? And so if a supplier goes direct because they want to get a big order and sell it for less money, so we have to me, again, we have to determine whether we are an industry that sells and buys direct to the Orient or we don't. But you cannot say in anybody's sense of fair play that it's okay for one and not for the other.
Well, when I look around, and I know many people's business, I don't see a table, and I'm not going to look any one direction where somebody hasn't bought direct. Distributor-wise, it goes on a daily basis. I'm not going to condemn it. I can tell you, I personally never did it. I always liked the concept of an insurance policy. There's one?
Well, so listen, I probably didn't know we were looking around a distributor.
Yeah.
And we're also
Can you stand up and speak a little? Do we have a hand microphone?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I can speak on.
Okay.
To your question, in the print industry, the sheet print industry, it's the same scenario. You have trade printers and you have end user printers. You
Right.
have commercial printers that sell to an end user, and you have trade that your partners trust So I, in the distributor side, I understand all these suppliers are trade only, and that's how it's quoted, that's how it's sold, as trade only. So if the distributor decides to go to offshore to buy a large order, they're buying from another supplier. So it's, they may not be a member of the association, but like you who manufacture a pen or a bottle, it just happens to be not in North America, it's sourced offshore. So as a distributor, you're trying to get the best dollar, best value for your client, and that's what gives you success. It's food on the table. So for me, if the supplier is going to disclose that they're selling direct, then I would think of them differently on who and when I send orders. It wouldn't mean that I wouldn't send orders, but I would be more selective when I send them orders. So that would be my comment on that. I think we have to be careful. As a distributor, I want to know the suppliers that are trade only or that sell as well brand. Because a customer, you may get an order, for example, you may sell an order to a supplier, that the supplier sends you goods, the box gets out there, there's packaging on the box, with us. So if you pick a number of suppliers that brand themselves in the packaging itself. So the customer, my end customer, gets a great product, they're really excited. Customers do it all the time. They'll say, I'm going to find out in the source. Why do you call these guys? And so if we're not confident that our supplier partners are trade only, then it may not be in our best interest to ensure that that box gets. That's my thought.
You know what? And this could be a very, very long conversation, but I think that there are certain deals that there's absolutely no way that because of the pricing demanded by the end user, that they can be competitive without going offshore. I wish it wasn't the case. I know it happens. But I will tell you this, and it was something I saw a lot of when I was at Ash City in the US. A guy would say to me, but Neil, I can buy a polo for $6 that you're going to sell me for 12. And I'd say, you're right. And I said, but let's walk through this. And he said, I don't understand. I said, so what happens when you're out of mediums? You can't order 50 mediums to fill the order. You're done. What happens when your double extra larges are left over? Because the only reason that the margins are 50% better is if you sell it all. And I will tell you, I know nobody that sells it all when you do apparel on those kind of things. So you have broken sizes and you have this, that, and the other thing. So now the difference between what you actually think you paid and what you did pay, in a lot of cases, is different. So you can have a hybrid of the two, and I would encourage you to work with suppliers. And I think suppliers have to be a little more flexible, saying, work with me and I will get you closer to factory pricing and finding those partners, those suppliers to partner up with. This concept that it's you against them, and I'm not suggesting you said that, I'm just saying, in general, distributor versus supplier is nuts. Because at the end of the day, those big orders will come in where it's a stock situation. And if anybody here thinks that suppliers don't have memories like an elephant, they know who's doing what to whom. And they do have a great influence. And I mean, everybody's going to go and say, it didn't happen, never happens. They control pricing. They control inventory. They control a lot. So I think it's in everybody's best interest to get along. I know people that have huge quantities that there's just no chance. So I'm not going to sit and condemn it, because I don't think you can. But if the suppliers aren't going to have the flexibility to meet me in the half and think that their margins have to be this, then Bob can't buy 200 million hats from him, because he's not going to win, and 40% of nothing is nothing. So it's not going to get solved today, but I really encourage people to try to get with a supplier who gets it. And suppliers have to be more flexible. This concept, that's my price, this is my margin, take it or leave it. You're driving them over the pond. So no one's to blame. It's just an ugly reality of what we're dealing with. And a lot of it has to do with the end user who's driving the bus saying, you know, not only are my prices this, my terms are 180 days. I'll pay you when I get paid. It's, you know, I often refer to it as a bobblehead environment. Everyone just says yes. And where did the lineup of stupid people start? Who's taking those orders at payment of 180 days at 6%? There's no shortage of them. And it's tough. So, you know, help yourself.
We're going to move on to fairness. The promotional court system is one of my favorite topics too. Being fair with one another on all aspects. There was that great quote, nothing is ever free enough. from a supplier. And I actually get that because distributors would like to get everything free. And what I tried to explain to my distributor reps at Brand Alliance is that there is no free. It's only free to you. It's not free to them. And there's a cost involved with that. And is that the way we should be dealing with our suppliers, taking all that stuff from them, because it's going to impact everything else. I mean, there is no free, there is a cost, and that cost has to go somewhere. So you really need to look at that when you ask. And I'm not saying it's easy, because as a distributor, if you go and show somebody, you know, they want a whole program full of stuff, if you ordered and paid for all the samples and all the shipping, you could be, you know, $300-400 in and not sold anything yet. So I understand it's a problem. But I think you have to figure out, and you had a good statement about the cutting the pie. There's only so much in it. And I'm going to give you my best example is when I was a rep, I went to another large customer, it wasn't him, to talk about their VIP program. And she started listing off to me the things that they wanted. Okay, so we went through the list, and it was here to here, the length, and it included things like, I'll read them to make sure, samples, freight, free samples, free freight, free specs, free virtuals, big rebates, lunch and learn sales meeting fees, open house fees, and then someone just brought up a new one called prebates, which just blew my mind. People are asking for money in advance of selling, which I thought was pretty amazing. Anyway, so I said to this person, I said, okay, in my head, I'm calculating this, and I'm not that great at math, but I said, I think that equals about 23% of the sales that you just asked for there. I said, who has that? Like, do you hear what you're asking? And does it make any sense whatsoever? Do you have 23% to give away to somebody? I said, that is just such an unfair, unequal proposition. So when you do a VIP program, and there are some good ones, and there are some really good ones, but a good VIP program, meaning that the supplier is paying into some of these things for the business. The other side of that is they have to get the business, number one, and they have to be given every business opportunity, and that's what doesn't happen. So if somebody's paying into your rebates or doing whatever you're paying for, you have to remember too, particularly with rebates, which I understand why they're there, but if your sales team doesn't get part of that rebate or doesn't know about that rebate, they will go and get a cheaper price from a competitor and sell that order because the rebate money didn't get in the way. So how do you work that? You know how you work that? You work it by being honest. You work it by everybody understanding the situation. We have a VIP program with these vendors, and this is why we have it. Not because they pay through the nose, but because they service well, because they have a great resolution, and therefore, and we have some deals with them on pricing, whatever. But that support has to go both ways. And that's the part of VIP that doesn't always happen, and why VIP programs are often thought of by a supplier. And I remember that as a supplier thinking, oh no, they want to talk about a VIP program. And what does that mean? And so, but it's easy to make it a very viable opportunity for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, the concept, and I've always been a full support, and I'm not saying it because Kate's here, and Spectre was one, and he sat down with me and he said, I'm going to cut this thing straight across the board. It's published, it's policed, and it's mandated. You do this, you get this, and I think most of us would agree that that's a fair system. And I had a lot of respect for Rob, and I said to him at the time, and I said, are you going to, because if you don't police this and you don't carry through with this, you've wasted my time. And I have not heard from anybody that he hasn't. And it's a credit to him, because that's a hard pill to swallow, because there's a lot of people out in this marketplace that want to beat on their chest, and I won't buy from you, this, that, and the other thing. So, you know, if the rebates are the foundation of your business, it's probably not a good business model, is my thought on that. Yes, rebates are great, and we had great rebates, but it can't be the end-all and be-all.
Honesty is the next topic. How many of you read that just underneath and you could hear the Spice Girls in your head? Just saying. Maybe I'm dating myself even more than I did before. I just want to read out some of the stuff. This is kind of a quick section too. This is the honest feedback that we've heard from people. But I want you to understand, everybody needs to understand, I think, that we are in business together, and we're all in business to make money. So when we pretend we're not, like everybody says he's my buddy, he's my friend, he wants to do it. Yeah, actually no. We're all in this to make money, and we all service each other, help each other, work together, partner together to make a better living for ourselves and to get that client what they need so that that cycle starts again. We may be lucky enough to make friends along the way, and I have been very lucky to make some, but most of the people we deal with are not our buddies. They're our business partners, and they need to be treated as such. And I think if you understand that perspective, it puts the perception of the value of the people in a different place. If you're talking about my buddy who'll do anything for me, or a business partner who wants to make money like I do, I think you actually approach them quite a bit differently. So suppliers, everybody wants respect, by the way. We talked about it before. They just keep saying it over and over again. They don't feel respected. And I think that if you leave with nothing else today, I hope you remember that, and you remember that photograph of the respect, no respect, because the people around you aren't feeling the love, and they should, because we're all partners. So you might think about why that might be from your perspective and in your own relationships. I know I think about it all the time. Suppliers want business partners who are willing to invest equally in time and money to build the business together, to be included in the sales strategy, payment within terms, loyalty, and to value offerings other than price, requests made with expectancy rather than expectation. This is my personal belief. The difference between making a request with expectancy versus expectation is the difference between a demand in sheep's clothing. If you ask somebody for something and you expect you're going to get it, that's not a request, that's a demand. You just hid it under the sheep's clothing by making it sound nice. So that's a really important thing to change in the way, again, not what you say, how you say it. From the rep, the supplier wants consistent quality industry intel. That's what suppliers want from their reps. They want reports of distributor business plans and programs. They want loyalty, and they want a clearer picture of what you are doing with your days, meaning not what are you doing all day, you're not working, but where's the value of your time being spent, and how's that working for us as a supplier. Distributors want respect as their top thing. From a supplier, they want open and early communication of issues. So if you're out of stock, or you don't have the color, or they want to know, and they want to know it quick. They want to know about inventory, reliability, solutions. Accountability and problem solving is one of the biggest issues for most distributors. They want a great website with online inventory. That's a very important, newer request, and it makes a big difference when you're trying to answer the client's questions in the moment. Lost my place there. Accountability and parts of the rep. They want great sales tools, and they want some way of communicating and telling your story that's not old school. They do email blasts. I mean, I do them, I've done them, I understand them. You have a very small return rate on them, and there are other ways to get your message across now, and I think distributors are saying, enough, let's find some different ways to communicate together. From the rep, the distributors want a quick response. They want them to be your advocate. They want you to go and problem resolve for them. So as a rep, when they call you and say, I got a problem, the supplier didn't ship, they want you to handle it. They don't want to see you forward that message. But the question is, and again, this is all part of the conversation we're having about being straightforward with each other, is that the right expectation? Should you expect that from your rep? You and your reps need to talk about that. Everybody needs to understand everybody else's roles, and I think we have a lot of misperception about what people are supposed to do. Hence my conversation about showroom cleaning. So what is the actual role of a rep? How do you want it best? And you know what? It isn't written in stone across the board. It is different for different people. And that would be a good conversation for a rep and an owner and a rep, or even a rep and their reps, the distributor reps. What do you want from me? What do you expect from me? And I think at that point, a rep has got to say, yeah, well, I'll do that. I'm not going to really be driving across the city in the middle of the day to drive you a pen sample. I'm just not doing that. So here's what I will do. I'll do idea generation, I'll do this, and I'll do whatever the list is. But everybody has to kind of agree and understand that that you need to talk about that. And then reps want respect from distributors. They want the opportunities. That's all a rep wants, is opportunities. They want face time, they want attendance at their sessions, they want attention, and I'm going to say this really big, guys, no cell phones during a PK session. There is nothing worse to be a speaker and to have cell phones going off or people down texting when you're talking or showing a product. It's just, you wouldn't do it to a lot of other people, you wouldn't do it with your client, don't do it with your reps. It's just, if you're going to go, give them the full attention they deserve. I think that's really important. They want follow-up, and they would like everybody to show up to their rep shows, right? Because that's a real good opportunity for everybody to see. And from the supplier, for the rep, the reps want from a supplier training, proper training, sales reports. They want to be CC'd on projects and communications. They want good sales tools. They want inclusion in the sales and marketing strategies. They want great communication. They want to be prioritized by your customer service department, and they want to be listened to. Okay, this is a long topic, and we are running
Way late.
way late. So this is an important one, though, and there are lots of things we could talk about with this. I brought in a bunch of different ways to do this when I was at Brand Alliance because it's something I feel very strongly about. I think whether you are being very grateful and thanking people every single day for what they do, even if it's a small thing. I mean, a lot of people do not respond to an email saying thanks when they get something, but you know what? It takes you a half a second, and the person on the other end gets acknowledged, number one, and you know that your message was met. There's very small things. I mean, even gifting. I mean, this is what the business we're in. We are in the business of gifts and self-promo, and you know, giving a supplier rep a gift after they've come in and presented to you, just to say thanks for coming, thanks for sharing your expertise, thanks for doing this for our team. It means very much to the rep, and it costs very little to a distributor, but it shows that you value their time. I mean, supplier to distributor, and I think they do that more. Awards, thank you notes, calls, gifts, but probably not enough. That's probably true. And a rep to distributor, they can just show appreciation for orders, you know, appreciation for attendance at the meeting. I mean, thanks everybody for coming, that was awesome. I'm gonna say that to you, thanks you guys for coming. And project opportunities, right? So there's so many things we can do to simply be nicer, to simply be a kinder person to everyone around us. And maybe that sounds sappy to some people, maybe because I'm old now. It means more to me than it ever has. You know, I was in charge of bringing Pay It Forward into Canada, and I feel very strongly about everybody doing that. I think when you take the time to say thank you, to say you look great, to say, you know, although that's a bad thing with the harassment thing, so don't say that. But you know, any words of kindness, act of kindness, gesture of kindness to show that you care about somebody, appreciate somebody, welcome somebody, respect somebody, is something that the people on the receiving end of that will be moved by, certainly for that moment, maybe for that day, and maybe for a lot longer. Please be kind.
I don't even know what to say after that. You know what, this is closing time, and we apologize, we've gone a little long. The reality is, and I'm as simple as it gets, I've had the luxury of seeing best practice throughout Canada, throughout the United States. And the one thing that is consistent, and you can look at whether you want to measure it by award ceremonies or whatever, the people, distributors that are treating their reps and their suppliers with respect are killing it because they treat their customers the same way. So, long and the short of it, it's not rocket science. It really isn't. We've talked about so much. Our hope is that we knew we weren't going to solve it today, but you go away thinking about it a little differently. Take a look around your table. You got multi-line sitting with distributors sitting with suppliers. Say thank you. It really goes a long way. We are dependent upon one another.
So we are wrapped up with our session. Now we are hoping that we can have some more discussion. For those of you who have time to, well, there's food and drink. Now you get one ticket, so you got to get your drink. If you all want to just walk around and schmooze with each other, that's fine. But if you actually want to come back and sit down, we have a lot of topics. I'll show you that we've got, what I've done here is posted quotes from those surveys, and any one of those can start a topic of discussion. Or you have your own. So we have a microphone that we can hand around to everybody if you want to do that. So let's everybody get up and stretch your legs, go get a drink, and you decide if you want to kind of hang here and we'll talk some more, or you want to just walk around and meet and greet. Up to you guys.